Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Paul F. Herron Graduate Program in Television and Media Management's 2023 Symposium Series. Today, we have Christina M. Coleman, who is the Senior Manager of Business Process Innovation at the Harry Walker Agency. Prior to her current role, Christina held positions at Netflix, the NFL, and MTV. She is a member of the Hollywood Professionals Association, a Television Academy Foundation program alumni, and an inaugural mentee of Netflix's Studio Production Innovations Product Mentorship Program. She holds an MBA from Cornell University, and this symposium is her last requirement for her master's in television and media management here at Drexel University. I will now turn it over to Christina. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you everyone for showing up. Really appreciate the support and seeing the familiar faces. So jumping right in, for those of you that know me, I love starting off with a Slido or a poll, right? So you don't have to use the Slido. It's there if you want to. I have a live poll going to capture some numbers. You could drop some thoughts in the chat. But when you hear entertainment technology, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? It's a couple of different options. You might think like, oh, I guess it means that too, but the first thing that comes to your mind is what I'm looking for. I'll give it a minute. See if anyone has any thoughts. Interesting. Okay, right now streaming is in the lead with 67%, followed by home entertainment. Okay, interesting. Good to know. And I think that's going to be the lead for us. So good to know where everybody's mind is at. And in general, entertainment technology, while it's very much inclusive of all of these things, for the purposes of this presentation, we're actually going to be focusing on entertainment technology in the context of internal solutions. So this is generally my thesis statement. And at a high level, it's basically saying traditional studios that are not tech first are in a position of constantly playing catch up. And a contributing factor to that is the investment in internal solutions that they have for their actual workflows. So as the television landscape shifts, so does the need for studios to update their internal technology solutions. First, tech entities like Netflix and YouTube put traditional Hollywood studios operations at a disadvantage, thus the continuous need to play catch up and meet the demands of the entertainment consumption that's happening right now. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. You'll recognize when I get to that point what that specifically means. But in addition to that, while researching here, something else I put in this thesis statement is that research shows an obvious gap in the studies for this need, meaning that through my research and studies, there's been tons of either, let's say like blog posts, things in the trades that's saying like, this is what's happening right now, but it was really hard to find true academic studies, theses, dissertations, white paper reports, etc., that takes the academic lens of this actual need and the gap that's happening within the actual industry. So this is my attempt at that. And then again, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to talk about entertainment technology in the context of internal and business-facing solutions. So everyone, like I said, with the poll itself, everyone's right in their own different sorts of ways. We're not going to be focusing on home entertainment, smart TVs, etc. for that. So we're going to be focusing on these three categories and how they're all interconnected with one another and how the different investments at different points plays a role in the actual internal business solutions. So with hardware and technical equipment, it's if you are talking about, are we going to film in 4K, UHD, what's the best red camera available for our productions to use, etc. With the consumer experience side, it's like, okay, what's the experience for the technology perspective when I go to view something on my laptop, my phone, my iPad, my smart TV, etc.? What does it look like in the metaverse and the future state experiences, etc.? And then lastly, as I said, the internal facing solutions, and that is how we deal with everyday workflows from the studio side to make everything happen interconnectedly. So what's happening is that studios, they're investing a lot in the actual hardware and technical onset solutions, and for the user experience itself when they're actually hitting play on a streaming system. But what is being left as questionable here to make sure that everything adds up is how much are they investing in the actual solutions for the people who are hired, for example, studio executives. What does that look like for them to be able to support the volume of content being ingested into the system, into the studio and produced, etc. Why is this important? Well, for perspective, the entertainment industry alone is worth $2.5 trillion. I'll say that again. The entertainment industry alone is worth $2.5 trillion. T as in terrific, not B as in bogus. As you can see with the other cross-tech industries, they're certainly in the billions as well. Biotech is in the trillions, but if the question here is if entertainment alone is worth 2.5 trillion, how much is entertainment technology going to be worth as things progress, and especially with the conversations around AI, et cetera. So some other numbers to keep in mind and why this is important. The Motion Picture Association says a strong national economy depends on a strong creative economy. They're not wrong here. Upwards of $250K towards local economies daily. FYI, side note, for every day that one show is down for the strike, studios lose between $200,000 and $300,000 a day. That's for one show per day. Think of all of the shows being produced out there and how much is being lost every day. So in addition to that, there's 2.4 million jobs created. There's over $186 billion in wages annually. And something you have to stop and ask with all of these numbers and all of this revenue being thrown about is what are the studios doing to alleviate these economical risks when they want to use something like AI to save money? And if we pause here and think about it, while AI is very much part of the conversation, something else you have to think is, if the current technology workflows internally aren't up to par, but they want to overcorrect it by using the newest thing without doing their homework, that's the thing that poses the economical risk and the backfire that they may not be planning for. So this number, and I had mentioned before, like why this would be important, 26.5 billion just for content is what media companies, main media companies and streaming companies are going to be using on, just for content. Content is inclusive of doing the actual production and distribution itself, licensing fees, etc. But this is just for content. So if they're spending this much, and by 2026, they will have spent nearly $94 billion just for content. Again, how much is being spent to support your internal employees to make sure that they're keeping up with the volume of demand? So this is a huge question that a lot of the studios are facing, especially with the talks of the recession. Are we, aren't we? Layoffs are going on in certain areas or certain departments more so than others. And with the layers of the strike, there's a lot of different things that are up in the air, but there's a lot of money at risk, not only for the revenue of the studios themselves, but for all of those individuals, as previously mentioned, like the 2.4 million jobs that get created, et cetera, that plays a big role in this as well. So a couple of traditional studio common pitfalls. They might have inadequate staffing or mistitled roles. What happens is that there will be studios that will create certain positions or teams, and they're kind of finding their footing because streaming is new to them, right? They're doing their homework as much as they can to attract the right talent that would have that tech lens or be in that tech role traditionally. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is layoffs. Layoffs is here with an asterisk because, you know, economically, it makes sense, or why studios would actually need to move forward with doing layoffs, but it's something that could potentially backfire if they're laying off in the wrong department in the wrong place. And then in addition to that, thinking about work culture, internal resistance to change, and then salaries to attract and retain talent, all of that's connected to each other because in general, Hollywood has an old way of thinking. But until Netflix came along and YouTube especially, things started to shift And there was a reason why a lot of old school Hollywood executives started to flood over to Netflix to start working for them. It was because there was a change that was going on, not only within the shift of the industry, but the culture of working together and how it operates internally as well. Something else to point out is that studios sometimes rely on consultant agencies. Nothing wrong with that. It's a couple of different pros and cons. Pros being that you have an outside perspective, a set of fresh eyes looking at things that you may not have caught before. Disadvantage of that, with consultant agencies, typically they might have people who are fresh out of business school come to them, and they may not have been fully immersed or had any sort of formal exposure long-term to the inner workings of the entertainment industry itself. So without that nuanced knowledge, it might not give the in-depth research and findings that they might be looking for, they meaning the studio, at the end of the day, and they might have a good solution, not necessarily the best solution, because of the intricacies of the entertainment industry itself. And then the last thing is the reactive state, rushing to use AI or any sort of new technology without the full understanding of it. So posing another question, what are traditional studios doing with their remaining resources to continue to promote the current productivity level? Remaining resources meaning if we assume that a company went on to do some layoffs, or they're cutting some sort of financial investment towards their resources, what does that look like for anything that's left? How are you equipping with the remaining employees and remaining resources for what they're going to do moving forward? So a couple of additional data points. So something to point out that studios may not be taking an extraordinary close look at is that manual workflows cost companies 20 to 30% of their annual revenue. In addition to that, collective manual tasks performed by an employee takes upwards of 40% of their workday. So those two things are very much interconnected. And so one happens without the other. And in addition to that, when looking at the stark contrast in investment, other studios that I had looked up income statements for on their financial documents, etc., their costs were either bundled within operations or hidden. However, with Netflix, it was explicitly called out that their revenues for technology and development was there on their actual income statement, and something that a tech-first company typically does, and showing that this is how much we are making sure that we're putting into investing within our tech and development. And this is just from Q1 of this year. All of this to say, without those additional resources or providing the correct resources, you're not alleviating the friction that internal resources, whether it's headcount or the actual tools that are being worked on, or et cetera, it leads to stunted performance for the studio overall. And in addition to that, it rolls up not only for the employee level, but the overall department performance, and thus the overall company revenue. So there are a couple of different solutions that already exist to help with streamlining workflows, et cetera. You're seeing a lot more of it on the actual production and tech side than more so on the internal studio side. And that's because there's a lot of studio proprietary tools that are going on behind the work, so it's not publicly known. However, if there's more adequate investment in proprietary tools as opposed to off-the-shelf solutions, that's the thing that's going to poise the company or the department at hand for the most effective use of what they could potentially do with the resource investment that they do. So with the studio proprietary tools, the thing with that is if you are given an off-the-shelf solution, and if it's customized to a point that it's overcorrecting a lot of things where you can't use it effectively because of the limitations of the product itself, that's where the need for a studio proprietary tool comes in. And because of that customization that can be built in automatically, even if it's a matter of connecting a bunch of existing workflows that already exist, that customization to perform to that specific workflow is the thing that's going to help streamline it and lead to everyone being more effective within their workday duties. So we talked a little bit about AI before, but talking about it a little more specifically here. The news is saying Hollywood isn't ready for AI. Quite literally, these are, when you Google, is Hollywood ready for AI? These were some of the search results within Google that came up. And we have to remember here that it's not limited to Hollywood isn't ready for AI because they may not know necessarily how to use it, or in the sense that if someone knows how to use AI to make their own film, do their own voicing, editing, animation, etc., Hollywood doesn't know how to respond to that. That's all very much part of it. But the thing is, it's not ready, meaning Hollywood isn't ready in the sense that no one has paused to truly understand the different implications of the use of AI and how to use it effectively. So what I mean by that is, this statement might be true, and what the trades are saying might be true, because if we look at that section, second image right there, in the Hollywood Reporter, basically some high-level executives are saying, hey, if a writer's strike did happen, how quickly can you spin up an AI tool to write the scripts? And basically they're like, that's fine. If writers want to strike, we'll use AI to replace them and we can still go on our merry way. The thing where this is problematic is because what's happening with the screenwriters, and it's that first screen grab there, is that they're being overworked for within micro writing rooms. And then they're also not being paid as much because of the amount of content that's being churned out. So for example, a typical show, 24 episodes in the early 2000s, you would work 40 weeks out of the year. Now, because of streaming and the amount of content being churned out, it's been consolidated between 8 and 12 weeks. So that's a huge gap right there. And then because they're also, they're not staffing adequately because they're saying, oh, we're not producing as much episodes because we have to focus on all of the different content that we want to put out. So they overwork the limited amount of screenwriters that they actually have. This conflicts because of the third image, which is while studios think that they can use AI to replace screenwriters, quote unquote, what they're not realizing right now is that through this study, this was done by Dramaton, and their paper is on, I believe it's Arvix, and I'm happy to share that afterwards if anybody is interested, but it was basically a research paper saying, hey, we have this AI tool that's been created for screenwriters to use and to actually make scripts. But through that actual test process, they noticed that what was generated from the AI itself was often repetitive, and that the screenwriters would have to go in and update a lot of the work that needed to be corrected because of what the AI system generated. So if AI systems are already doing this, and if studios are saying, hey, we want AI systems to replace screenwriters, who's doing that work? Who's updating what's generated out of the screenwriting AI to begin with? Who's actually entering in that prompt for the script to even be generated at all? So it's that question there where it's kind of like you have to step back and think, does this make sense for studios to try to truly replace screenwriters with AI? Or is it a matter of looking at how to use AI as an actual tool, or are we repurposing screenwriters because of the way, repurposing their role within the actual pipeline from script to screen? Are we repurposing their roles for how that sits within the industry itself? So in general, to remain competitive, a couple of the things that I would recommend studios would do is to repurpose, not replace or cut jobs with AI and tech, at least not until the homework has been done, and to really understand how to leverage those people who already have that legacy knowledge and apply it to the new systems that are being implemented. The other thing is, again, to do their homework, don't use tech for the sake of using new tech. I say that because there's a lot of different methodologies out there, Agile, Scrum, Kanban, etc. And there's some companies that think, oh, if we can just operate in the same way or use this new tool, it's going to make everything great. It can to a certain extent, but not every team or department within a company is designed for it to be used effectively. So that's something else to keep in mind. The next thing would be adequately invest in internal efficient pipelines to meet the demand of scaled content. If they're going to be spending $26.5 billion in content, make sure that your internal employees who are managing that actual content are set up for success. And then the last thing is, don't be afraid to outsource something in order to maintain positive cash flows. It's plenty of work to be going around. Everyone seems to be hyper competitive at the moment, but if there's backdoor handshakes happening because of distribution and licensing deals, it's not a bad idea to see if they can partner and understand from one another what type of technical solutions are being done. And if it makes sense for a studio to say, hey, we're going to outsource my technical, our workflow needs to your technical solutions because we haven't invested in it yet, but you already have it. We're already working on this together, etc. So that way everybody wins. And that's it. This particular QR code is if you would like to connect on LinkedIn. Otherwise, that's the link itself. And thank you again. Sticking around for questions if anyone has any.
Do you foresee more checks and balances in place in the future with a tech platform to kind of check behind for AI generated content similar to plagiarism platforms?
Sure. So I would see that happening after more of, I'd say from the legal perspective, the different ethical things that would be explored. So while that's very much part of it, the other thing that I like to point out when talking about AI is that the generated response is only as good as the data that's put in, and then also based on what is already out there. So with that in mind, you kind of have to think, okay, if you're already doing this, and if everybody else is doing the same thing, it's going to be pretty obvious if someone is plagiarizing something because it's spitting out the same sort of content, etc. So that will be something that I think people might scale back from actually doing, and still they understand the value of how to draft like a super prompt to actually buffer the AI itself before they go to use that final generated response. The other thing is, I think that because social media was slow to, I think it's 10 years or so to make it to the federal level, and more regulations are coming into place, I think that will be sped up in the context of AI. And because of those conversations and laws and regulations that would happen sooner, I think it would trickle downward immediately to the academic world.
There is a question in the chat from Haley. How can someone who is a consumer of content support the industry and writer strike specifically?
Sure. So supporting the writer strike specifically, it's hard to do in the sense that if you are a supporter of writers, and if you are someone who is connected to the industry, but also a consumer, not going to things like upfronts, movie premieres, the kind of basically abstaining from attending the same things that the actual writers are abstaining from attending, that's certainly some way to support it. Another thing is start dropping your subscriptions. I recently read that Euphoria, the HBO show, that's going to be postponed on air until 2025. So with that, it would send a message to say, oh, my favorite show isn't coming around. My other ones are put on hold. Why should I be spending, $20 a month for content that I'm already familiar with, and I can probably get at a competitor cheaper, or different sources that may not be the most legal, but are certainly out there to watch all of those different pieces of content. But I think that is going to be the most impactful thing, because just like the same way that the writers themselves, they're productions are coming to a halt. They are quite literally shut down. So that's the one thing. And so without the content, if you also basically hit studios in their pockets and drop subscriptions, that's the other thing that's going to help feed that.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions for Christina?
I actually got one direct message for a question. Is there any research being done on consumer interest or capacity for the content written by AI? Research being, I want to say probably. Do I know specifically? I'm not sure. I think it's also probably happening on a smaller scale in like a silo somewhere, because with consumer interest in general, it's so specific based off of the different streamers and networks already. So it's something you wouldn't necessarily hear on the consistency and mainstream level that you might be used to with other sorts of topics.
And Kim has her hand up.
Hi, just a really quick question. One thing that really triggered me was the fact that, screenwriters being repurposed for repurposing their roles. Do you have any prediction as to maybe an example of like how they exactly would be repurposed? I think one of the scary things that I see about AI is like the overall, I guess, takeover of human creativity, right? So especially if AI is the one that's going to be generating these scripts, and let's say the script is like the main, let's say their repurpose is to just maybe tweak that script through and through. I still fear for them in a sense of like that creativity is being taken away. And then what would the reality be if, let's say, these production companies continue to use AI scripts of like just the overall quality of content that it will be provided on these streaming services? So I guess it's a two-parted question, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I personally think that the studios will eat their words very quickly. I say this because even if they were to, let's say they go down this path, let's say that, the strike doesn't work out the way that it should, where biasly, I think that, the writers do deserve a fair wage, et cetera. I think studios are being a little ridiculous with some of the things that they're putting out there, but let's say that it does go that way where they say, nope, we're just going to have you be script editors and we're using scripts only generated by AI. What I would like to see are the studio executives looking at the quality of a script written by a professional screenwriter versus the script that's written by or produced by the actual AI tool, and then a script that is produced by a screenwriter that's leveraging the AI tool. Looking at those three different scenarios, what do they prefer? Like, what do they think had the most value added? And kind of like it would be a case study to show that, oh, this particular script, it was good, it was fine, but it needed a lot of extra work. We spent a lot of time developing, et cetera. And it's like, okay, is this the one that was generated by the AI tool? If so, why are we using that to basically replace screenwriters? And then, yeah, going back to the point about the data only being as good as what it puts in, you need something new. Like, what in general with Hollywood, what is old can be made new again, but if you don't have the writers who were born and trained with that unique creativity to give the new, you're going to be stuck with the old. So if you're consistently stuck with the old, then people are going to say, why are we paying for something that isn't inspiring, isn't generation changing, isn't something that I've never seen before, that I don't see myself represent? Like, if you're not providing that type of content that is moving us forward as a society, why are we bothering? We're not going to pay for it anymore. We're not going to do it, or we'll make our own. We don't need the studios. There's going to be tons of tools for that. So I think if they were to take that path, and if that all were to backfire on them, they would backtrack in their decision. They would eat their words. And I think that the screenwriters, it would just be another feather in the cap to show how much they really are needed, and how much they should be valued within the industry.